Hey guys, this is Stewie from Cloud9.
Okay, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this episode is going to be Hex from OpTic Gaming. Now, obviously, OpTic is not an organization that has a long history in CSGO. I mean, you only really picked up the first team early 2016. So before that, are you someone who actually, like, what was your involvement in CSGO? Were you interested at all? Did you come over when CSGO got big? What was the kind of the genesis in that sense?
Yeah, so I wasn't a big fan of CSGO, but I was obviously very familiar with CSGO. I think I even dabbled in it on Xbox, to make everybody mad. No, I always know what CSGO is, in my opinion. Obviously, because it's all S&D, it became something easy for me to watch. I'm a big fan of the S&D game mode, and I've always been like that. I've always been attracted to that specific, tactical game that is S&D. So it was very easy for me to follow before I even stepped into it.
Yeah. So, but one of the interesting things about CSGO is you can actually really chart how big the game was getting by when some of the other organizations came in. So, for example, before like FaZe, OpTic, it was actually some of the League of Legends teams who first came in. It was the Cloud9s of the world, these sorts of orgs. Like, what was the moment when you decided, like, you had to get in? Because presumably it wasn't like the instant you signed this roster, right? You must have been thinking about it before.
Correct. Yeah, I thought about it for about 7 months before we actually made the merge or the pickup of Team Conquest, and I knew that it was time to do that when our fans, the Green Wall, was just like had enough, and they needed us in there in that esports. So that's when I said, all right, let's give it a serious thought, and that's when the 7-month process started to become a thing. And for the most part, I don't regret a single moment of it.
Okay, so you always say this, you always stress this concept, which, by the way, I noticed there's certain sports franchises do the same thing, which is the idea of, like, trust the process, which is that, even if we start with, let's say, like a young player or an unproven player, it's the idea that, you don't have to expect instant results. Like, in the end, whether we use this player or not, we're going somewhere and we have kind of a philosophy. Has that always been your approach to OpTic? Is it something you kind of developed, at least in terms of a saying more recently?
Nope. In OpTic, and as big as we got in Call of Duty, I think that we had the biggest growth during the Black Ops 2 season, year, where we won the first event, which was in December, and then for a whole year we don't win anything at all until when was it? I think it was X Games. No, who was? I think it was something like that. I think we weren't winning at all for the entire year, but we had the biggest growth due to the fact that we were developing these personalities. We were on camera constantly, and we were making the fans interested in following the story behind the player, behind the game. And for some reason, the mixture of being an underdog and being a very, very popular team, that made it be one of the biggest franchises in Call of Duty, if not the biggest. The process that I talked about, and people brought up this whole trust the process when we won E-League Season 2. The reason that they did that is because when we picked up Conquest, I was being super criticized about it, right? Like, why didn't you go after a European team, which we tried to, and why didn't you make this why couldn't you pick a better team to give us, right? Like, yeah, we've been demanding, and this is the fans, we've been demanding to enter into Counter-Strike, but you give us like this okay team. What are we supposed to do? Just follow you along blindly and just let shit happen? And for me, it was more about becoming a part of CSGO more than just in the traditional competitive sense. Becoming a part of CSGO in the cultural way was a little bit more important for me, because establishing, going in there and just getting a team and then just building. There's nothing wrong with that. I acquired the old CLG Halo team, and they're a championship team. So I see nothing wrong with the acquisitions of teams to just get into the sport and win. But I did feel that in Counter-Strike was, I saw an opportunity there for us to become a part of it culturally. Something that we're working on, trying to be a staple brand in CSGO is more important than to just like jump right in and win everything and become a part of it that way, right? The storylines for me are always very important. The storylines for me are what drives interest and what drives the passion of whoever's following the sport in a very close regard. Now, I will say this: one of the main reasons why I find CS:GO such an attractive place to be is because in CS:GO the sport is bigger than the players. The sport itself is bigger than the orgs, is bigger than the biggest stars, right? In Call of Duty, we don't have that. In Call of Duty, we did a very, very good job of being bigger than the sport, and that was on purpose, right? That was very much the plan when we began doing this, and with the help of the players that I was with, their willingness to be more than just a professional player was, probably the catalyst that drove us to be that.
So one of the interesting things that I thought made it very hard for organizations who were getting into CSGO or hadn't just always been there from day one is that not only was the game expanding, but as a result, as other orgs from different games looked and saw, hey, maybe we want to get into CSGO, it's meant that we've had like this crazy curve of how much it costs to get a team and then what buyouts are and then what the salaries are. And the problem with it is, it's like there's no real ideal way to get in. Like, you can never know if you're spending too much initially, because I've noticed that since the curve just keeps going up and up and up, I know a lot of people who at one point in time told me like, oh, I don't know if this team's worth that money, and if I went back to them now and said like a year later you could have that team for that much, now they jump on it because it might cost twice as much, so yeah. Was that when you came into CSGO, a lot of people look at orgs like FaZe or OpTic and they think, oh, these guys have all the money in the world. If they want, they could just pick up the #1 team or whatever. Was there like any concern when you were coming in, like you don't want to just spend the most, for example? That's a bigger risk, right?
Well, of course, it was a big risk, and being fiscally responsible is something that you have to do at all times. Just because you have the money doesn't mean that you get to just spend it, just because. You have to have a plan in order to do that. And our plan was very, very heavily involved around the storyline that it was the history of OpTic in CSGO. The history of OpTic in CSGO has to follow a certain path in order to become whatever it is it's going to become. And for me, it was about finding something that made financial sense for the organization, and also being able to turn it around and make it profitable. Because just because it makes financial sense and you can afford it, it wasn't a matter for me to just like right in come in and buy a team and make it just to be involved in the scene. Again, for me, the main important part of all of this is the process of the storyline that is OpTic in CSGO. So for us, it was a matter of finding a team that made financial sense and could eventually one day turn a profit.
Okay. So then when you came in and you got the Conquest team, as you've kind of alluded to by the criticism, this was a gamble. I mean, this is a team, they'd had like an okay result. I remember they had like a top 4 at a CEVO. Yeah. But if you looked at the players, the key detail of a lot of these players is they were either players who'd never made it to the, the #1 teams, which were the Cloud9s of the world at the time. Or some of them, I mean, in the case of people like Shazam, Daps, some of these guys had kind of been like rejected by some of the bigger teams when they'd had their chance. So a lot of people looked at the lineup and were like, okay, maybe they're all right, but they're never going to go anywhere. So what was attractive about this team? What kind of made you think this is the team I'm going to get?
Well, I was in talks like a lot of people with Astralis. I think the way that they went about it is very, very smart. The right way to do it, in my opinion. Which was pretty much, this is, give us your best offer. We're going to go with the best one. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to do anything. Just give us your best offer. And I think, Frederick did a really, really good job in doing that. So that never went anywhere. And to be honest, as I was doing the research and I was reading as much as I could about Counter-Strike, the only place that I ever went to and seriously sat down and listened and just like soaked it all in was when you and Richard were doing by the numbers. Yeah, by the numbers. And I remember like listening to you guys, and then you guys mentioned OpTic, and then you guys said, this Conquest team may be the best possible choice for OpTic. That was like a really, really good selling point for me. I'm like, all right, look, these guys are, obviously this is their job to know this stuff. So that show had a lot to do with my decision to go after the Conquest team. And then after picking them up, I was immediately in love with the team. from a personality standpoint, right? Like Daps was a really, really cool dude. You know, Rush, amazing, cool. Every single person in there. Shazam, obviously, we brought him over to the house so we can do the announcement. You know, the certain way that I wanted to do the announcements, and you know, in hanging out with Shazam, everybody at the house was like, "Yo, this is a cool dude. We're not, like, we'd love for him to like be around more." And that was just like all of if you put it into a package, it was like it's something that I couldn't ask better for, because I knew that I could work with them. I knew that I could work with them to become, again, a part of the culture in Counter-Strike. And although it was an NA team, and at the time, you know, the NA jokes were like super, like you see them everywhere, right? Like obviously it started to subside as the year went along, but at the time I'm like, all right, look, we can, if anything else, we're gonna have a lot of content that we can share with our fans, right? And if we create content around this specific sport, then I'm pretty sure that the rest of the scene, that the rest of the culture in CS:GO will appreciate that the fact that we're at least trying to build something, whether it's a championship team or a very popular team in Counter-Strike. You know, eventually, you know, the team went on to become better and better. But for me, the whole time, it was like I never put pressure on them to win. Obviously winning's nice, but I told them, you know, like, listen, just consider this whole year a building process. Let's just do what we need to do to one, have fun and create good content, but two, still make the strides to make the team better. You know, eventually Shazam was replaced by Mixwell, and you know, we really lucked out on Mixwell, and then from there was a nice starting point for us.
So, okay, on the Mixwell pickup, this is another move where, like, it's real tough for anyone on the outside to look at that move and say, oh, this is definitely going to work, it's going to be an upgrade. Like, the thing about Shazam is, he's always been, like, a good player. He's obviously just had, you know, personality conflicts with teams, you know, or he didn't vibe with a team. But since he has been, like, an above-average pro player, if you said, we're just going to pick up a guy who, essentially, for international views, may as well have just been a random player. Like, we're just going to pick up a random European player, he's a Spanish guy. That's a big gamble. Like, what did you actually know going into the move?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. You know, one day, you know, I was in a call with the guys, and they said, you know, it's not working out with Shazam, and immediately I'm like, no, chill. Let's try to make this work, guys. Like, we can't just make a decision like this just because, right? I've owned a team and managed players long enough to know that, you know, just because emotions are running high, it doesn't mean that that's the right time to make a change if a change is needed. I've always been a guy that likes to fix things, and I've always been a guy that just, you know, doesn't back out of any challenge, just period. So far it's worked. So far I've had a lot of success in doing that, but I put a lot of trust in the players, right? There, you know, I always refer to, you know, the government and deciding what, you know, the soldiers should be doing on the ground. Like, they're not the ones on the front lines. They're the ones that are seeing it in real time on what it is that's happening. So I always put a lot of trust in the players and knowing better than me. The discussion obviously always happens between both of us. The decision's always made, you know, between both of us. But for the most part, I put a lot of trust in what they do. They know better. It'd be naive for me to think otherwise. But to the same side, I always think that trying to figure something out is better than, you know, just for exercise sake, right? Just for exercise sake, trying to fix something is a lot easier than to just replace it and throw money at the situation and try to solve it that way. So I didn't know anything about Mixwell at the time. You know, the Daps was the one that did all the research. Daps was the one that, you know, went into HLTV and talked to the people there and said, you know, who's been doing good? They said Mixwell. Mixwell came over. And again, for me, you know, picking up that team, it was never about like, all right, we're going to win right away. We're going to win right away. You know, I never expect, you know, I have hopes for that, right? But I never expect to see results right away. I'm 37 years old. I've been around long enough on this earth to know that patience is key in a lot of situations, in the majority of situations. If you assess something instead of react to something, it's always, you know, the better way to do it. So I took the gamble on that too, you know, because I wanted to develop the sort of trust with the players, and I wanted to develop the sort of trust within the community. One, that I was going to try to do my best to continue to improve the team, but two, and more importantly, that I was here for the long run, and I was not here just to stamp my name on a new esport just for my brand's sake, right? I think we're doing okay without doing, and I think we're doing okay without having to do, you know, those quick expansions into other esports, right? We don't have to, how do I say this? We don't have we don't have the same pressures that other organizations do because our media prowess, right? Our ability to put eyeballs in front of brands. So, for me, it was, again, becoming a part of the culture. And luckily for me, it was a sport that has my favorite game mode in it, which is, obviously Counter-Strike. I mean, S&D.
So one of the issues I've noticed with having Mixwell in the team is actually one of the reasons why, if you're a fan and you look at, like, for example, Cloud9, and you'll hear fans like, why not pick up this European player or this European player? And I can tell fans now, unfortunately, most European players won't go. Like, unless they had some ridiculous offer, like, unless it was like 5 times what they'd get in Europe, a lot of them aren't going to go. And one of the main reasons, actually, is because Counter-Strike's quite unique as an esport, in as much as in Europe, they don't have team houses. People just live with their family.
Yeah.
And that's a huge upside, if you can be in a good team and live with your family and just go home all the time,
yeah.
People love that. So I know I've heard behind the scenes numerous times that Mixwell, either he was a bit concerned about this, or sometimes maybe he was even thinking, like, is there a way out for me in a few months? Is it okay if I play and then can I go back to Spain at some point? Has this been a difficulty in keeping a European player essentially overseas the whole time?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, you couldn't put me in a team house. I live 10 minutes away from our team house, and that's something that I've always found an issue with. As much as team houses are good, maybe for a boot camp and all, from a lifestyle perspective, it's really not that optimal, right? The reason that the reason the team houses are successful here in North America is because they don't come here just to train. They come here to build their own entity in the space, and not just esports. I'm talking about in the world of video games. There's nothing more powerful, in my opinion, than a player that is very, very good at a particular esport, but also has a large following because he plays other games. And this is something that we at OpTic have turned over several times. It wasn't until we started playing Minecraft that we took that super blow up in Call of Duty, because at that moment, that was when we knew that we had transcended Call of Duty into something else. And for me, the job was done, right? Because I'm taking in these kids that are foregoing college and just concentrating their full efforts on this. I couldn't in my right mind be okay with them going to a tournament hoping that they're going to win money and they're going to have money for the rest of the year. I focused on helping them develop a brand for themselves, a personality, a business of their own, where they would be self-sustainable, not need OpTic, not need me, not need anything but their hard work and imagination when they're producing content. That sort of revenue stream kind of appeases the mind, and it takes a little bit of the pressure, and you just show up to compete for competition's sake. And that's what when it comes to a team house, that's when it's important, because you're with like-minded individuals who are going to collaborate, and maybe it's not the case at this point in time with how we're doing, but we're working towards a different idea, a different model, in my opinion, that will be successful in the near future. But again, it's very easy to say, all right, we're going to put a team house together and you guys are going to practice and create content, right? But the players that are going to be in there, you have to be mindful of that particular of their particular state of mind when that happens. I talk to Oscar regularly and ask him, I ask him if he's talking to his mom, if he's talking to people back home. Does he need to be back home? Does he need me to fly in his girlfriend? For whatever. Right now in the Counter-Strike house, there's 2 people living in there. It's just Oscar and one of our graphics guy, an editor. So, I told Oscar, I'm like, I can move the graphics guy for a week over to the other house, which is 10 minutes away, and then you can bring in your girlfriend. You have a pool in the middle. You guys can have a blast. It'll be your own little sanctuary, little piece of paradise. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess it depends on how you look at it. CS:GO is just filled with tournaments, right? Like, it's super, super, super like saturated, and luckily there's the reward is there for the players, where they can say, you know what, I'm in my 20s, I want to work hard now so I can live a certain way in my 30s. So they do it, right? So it's not that bad, but the amount of time off that these guys don't have, it's kind of disappointing that it's gotten to that point, in my opinion.
Okay, so you referenced like building the brand and kind of the idea of like having something that you work on that's not just results based. You don't have to win the tournament to potentially make money. This is one of the things that really opened my eyes about for example, obviously Call of Duty, because the world I came from in the past of esports, like there wasn't as many websites that covered the game, and I used to look at the viewing figures, and as these other games, League of Legends, CSGO, were going through the charts, I would see the viewing figures, and I was like, that's not really that impressive. But then what blew my mind was when I discovered that it's because like fans of Call of Duty live on YouTube and Twitter. Like the followings on those sites are way beyond almost everyone else in the other games. So this is one of the things I was interested to see what you do in CSGO, because there's actually not many teams even to this day develop much content or have a lot. And obviously you and some of the other COD orgs were some of the first to really get on the trend of like vlogs and doing regular updates and kind of like building kind of the personal brand. Have the CSGO players gone all in as much on that? I mean, a lot of CSGO players in general are a little bit quieter, or aren't putting themselves out there in the same way. Have you kind of had to convince them a bit? Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, it all starts out by, you ease them in. You don't just put a camera in front of somebody and expect them to be, great at it. It's a conversation that needs to happen. It's a training process that needs to happen. And, little by little, if you look at the interviews that Rush had at the beginning, or if you look at the interviews that, that Mixwell had at the beginning, they weren't they weren't that outgoing in that, right? But the second that it becomes like the norm, like they know that Hitch is going to come over and do a quick interview for Vision, which is our weekly series, they become a little bit more comfortable with it, and this sort of training of them being in front of camera while people are guiding them, this is going to cement something in their brain that's going to say, all right, when I do it for myself, if I choose to do it for myself, when I stream or whenever it is that I do, I understand that I need to look into the camera to make that connection with whoever's watching. I need to, answer certain questions that aren't even being asked, just because it's the norm and that it's questions that people are wondering, and it's the conversation starter, for example. So have we had a difficult time, getting these guys to do that? Yes, a little bit. But the fact that they're open to it, just it's all I need to be able to know that something's possible there.
So one move that a lot of people will have forgotten about in OpTic, which was very bizarre, was you brought in Devilwalk as the coach.
Yeah.
But then I seem to remember, wasn't there something like the ruling was you brought him in too late for the major itself? Something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
He couldn't officially be the coach at the major or something. So what did you actually think about the whole coaching aspect? Because that's another aspect that at that particular time in the year, I mean, admittedly, it was just after that major when it kind of got slashed away. The legs got cut out from it, where you couldn't have them as in-game leader. What was the philosophy on bringing in Devilwalk? What were you trying to add there?
Look, I knew that it was too late. I knew that it was something that the team said we need this, so I gave it to them, pretty much. Do I feel that coaches should be in there? I mean, again, it's up to the players to decide that. I don't know why they allowed it at one point and then disallowed it in another. But in Call of Duty we had the same thing. Some teams had coaches, some teams didn't. We didn't, and other teams did. But that was just something that, again, it was a player's decision in my situation whether or not they needed it. Now they said we need to boot camp with Devilwalk at, where was it? I don't even remember. I said Cologne. I don't even remember.
That was the major side. It seems so. Yeah.
Yeah. So. We got him a boot camp spot over there, and then brought Devilwalk in to help them, train for it.
So in the first major of the year, that was actually where we first had the minor process and stuff. So it was very, very quickly after you'd picked up the team. So not qualifying for the first major is not that ridiculous. But was it a big deal to make the second major, to have made it into an actual full-on major? We're not talking about the old days where almost every good team made it. It's very competitive to even make it in nowadays.
Yeah, from a psychological standpoint, absolutely. Having not made it to one and then made it to the next one, offers a little bit of hope and a little bit of shine at the silver lining at the end of the tunnel, however you say that. And for me, it was it's those little victories and successes that help keep the positive mindset both in the players and the org. And my thing currently is trying to keep them as positive as possible, mentally, knowing that it's a rebuild. I try to take as much pressure off of them as all possible. I just want them to concentrate on getting better to where we were towards the end of last year. And the stand situation was a little bit tough for us because it had this domino effect where it put me in a situation where I was going to have to, like, remember, I was supposed to do an interview with you during those times, and the reason that I had to postpone was because, look, I didn't have the answers. I was waiting for everything to fall into place to know what sort of conversation I was going to have with you, whether it's going to be, a calm, positive, we're talking about the space and all this shit, or an explanation on what went wrong and how I let it go wrong. And it was going to be a tough one because, it was going to be one of those situations where I was going to have to, I was going to have to put some sort of explanation out there, that would have been tough. Not for me, because I would have still been like, all right, well, look, we have to rebuild. That's fine. I can do this. Let's get working. But, a lot for fans and for the community would have been like, he messed this up.
Okay, so one of the biggest moves, I mean, the Mixwell move's obviously big 'cause it starts to put in place the team that's going to become successful. But the biggest move for me was obviously the one where you picked up Tarek. Because the funny thing is, because he's been like a big name in NA for the last few years, people can look back in hindsight knowing how he played and be like, oh, great move, like, yeah, solid one. But people don't realize that was a big gamble. Like, I'll tell people the behind the scenes of that is that in the months leading up to that, other teams had tried to sign him from CLG. Like, I know Team Liquid wanted him, Cloud9 was like sniffing around, These teams wanted to try him out at the time because, he may be in his career peak. Yeah. But then the word that got back to every team basically was along the lines of like, you can't sign him. Like, it's like all the amount would be astronomical, And then after that, he'd actually had this period where sort of the public had really turned on him because in CLG, they felt like, because he kind of felt like he was trapped there, like, he's just playing out his contract, he doesn't care. And he kind of implied as much almost himself. So a lot of people would say, oh, like, this is they either expect him to retire or he's just going to take a back seat now, So first of all, how did you get him from CLG? Like I said, those other orgs, they couldn't. They actually wanted him.
Yeah, we bought him out. The amount, obviously, NDAs and stuff. But when I first heard of Tarek, I was immediately like, I don't want to say like captivated, right? But I did see something in him that I could literally work with, and he already had this sort of like online personality with the No Shirt TV and his streaming, that I knew that if we have the opportunity to have this player, we're going to have him because we're going to have somebody that is already committed some time to being a content creator, and immediately I'm like, all right. This is we have to get this dude, right? And the team wanted him, first of all, but secondly, I saw the potential, and I'm like, all right, this is going to be good. And then sure enough, when I met him in person, super cool dude to hang out with, and that to me is a lot, right? Because I know that a lot of people say you got to separate business from friendship, and you got to do this, but that's not the way I do things. I like to work with the people I work with, right? I know what it's like to work in corporate America, where you have to show up, punch a clock, and work with people are forcing you to work with, whether they're assholes or not, and you have to do it because you got to get paid. And when I started doing this, the whole OpTic thing, and it's my thing, it's my own thing. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. Sure, there's going to be occasions where you're going to get into a headbutting competition with somebody and you scar at it, and people don't get along with each other. But working through that on our terms, however we want to do it, was like a magical thing, right? So being able to be cool and friends and be able to hang out with, outside of the whole sport thing is really, really cool. It makes it a lot easier for you to get vested even more into their success. And that's something that I'm proud to say, right? My ability to care about my player success has led me to this position that I'm in right now, where we're good. We have a good business. We're having fun, and just like anything else, we have our trials and tribulations. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge that you'll gladly take because it's your thing.
So obviously we'll get to the Stanislaw leaving OpTic for good, but there was actually a very weird situation happened when Tarek joined, where when Tarek joined, people will forget this because it was only brief, but initially it was announced that actually Stanislaw was the one getting removed, and it was Daps that was going to stay, and then a few weeks later, like we'd already heard the rumblings behind the scenes, like no, it's going to go the other way, they're going to flip the move basically, they're going to bring back Stanislaw, and it's actually Daps that's out, and obviously at the time, Daps was the in-game leader of the team, and had been for a while, so can you give us some background on that? What was going on?
It was plain and simple. The in-game calling of Daps didn't really line up with the way that Tarek was used to, and they they really sat down again. This was another situation where we didn't take the time to assess what was really going on, and they said, all right, we need to remove Stan because this is going to work. We need to replace Stan with Tarek. All right, so we did that, and then Tarek said, it's like, is this the way that you guys usually like run things? This is the way that the calling goes, and then they reassessed the situation. We kept Stan obviously on the bench, then we brought Stan back on the bench, or to the just musical chairs essentially, and they realized that Stan was the person to in-game lead, and that's where we went with it. It wasn't even a matter of 3 days, which is why everybody's like, are you going to make the announcement? Are you going to make the announcement? I'm like, I can't make the announcement until I know like what it is that we're doing. I'm going to look like an idiot if I say, Tarek's replacing Stan, and this is what I do, and this is what we're going to move on with, right? Without knowing, right? So then obviously we waited, and I think we put Daps on the bench, and then essentially gave him away to whoever it is that he was going to pretty much release him from his contract.
So the interesting thing about the lead up to the E-League Season 2 win is that it's definitely not predictable if you look at the results, because the results are really up and down. Like you had the Northern Arena where, you beat G2. That's a pretty good result, But then you went to the DreamHack Winter Tournament, which was, fairly... There wasn't a really that sick a field there, and you guys became last place. So how does the E-League Season 2 win happen? Because actually, I remember every single round of the playoffs, every analyst I know was picking against OpTic, even in the first one against Mousespots. At the time, Mousespots had a couple of top 4 finishes. So how does the victory actually come about? The players, man, the stars aligning. I mean, I couldn't tell you. Everything was clicking for us. We've seen progress when we picked up Tarek. Little by little, they were becoming better. They were falling into their groove. They were becoming like a good team, a good, well-oiled machine that if given the right opportunity and given the right scenario, they were going to come through and win. I couldn't say the specifics because I don't know what it was specifically that brought on the win, aside from the fact that we were presented with the right scenarios and the team was gelling like they've never ever gelled before. When you guys won E-League Season 2, and then obviously very shortly after you got to go to ECS and you got to the final of that tournament, these are like a couple of big performances for an NA team. Yeah. What were you actually thinking? Like, should that have been able to be maintained? Should you have been able to do like a 3-4 month run as that level of a team? Like, why do you think the drop off happens when you go to the major?
Mentalities, man. I don't know. If it was, I don't know. I couldn't tell you what it was. It's how do I say it? I don't think that what happened should have happened. I think that coming off a win like that should have given you enough confidence to go into the next one thinking, we are that team. I am that player. I am that player that performed this way in E-League, and we're gonna do it again. Look, we made it to the finals in ECS the following weekend, which is again, like super lame in my opinion that you don't get to enjoy a championship as long. We enjoyed the E-League championship for a week before we had to compete again. Like, how lame is that? In my opinion, like that is. Like it's good for the people that win and it's good for the players and stuff. But I come from a background where tournaments don't happen as often as they do. And I will tell you right now, I will try my damnedest to make sure that doesn't happen in Call of Duty. One, because I want to preserve the passion that the players have right now for winning, and the oversaturation of that is it's gonna bring in problems from a higher level that we just don't need to be there. And again, I'm not trashing the current culture of Counter-Strike in the way that they run tournaments and how often they run them. If the players are happy, then by all means keep on doing it. But at some point or another, like there needs to be some sort of consideration as to whether or not this is sustainable from a player standpoint and from a I don't know how to explain it. Like it's good to see Sunday football every single Sunday, but for a season, right? To have this be a 52 weekend thing is, I don't know.
If at the last major, so the Cologne one, at that point, qualifying for your first major. That's like step one. You know, if we do that, great. Then we'll see what can happen. This one, you had to think there was a chance the team could go deep, right? So it must have been shocking to finish so poorly.
Yeah. But again, I'm happy with the team that I had. I was very, very happy with it. You know, I come from a mentality that, you know, you win some, you lose some, and then you work on getting better for the next one. Yeah, it was disappointing. You know, I was more disappointed in the fact that, you know, the players got down on themselves as much as they did, because, you know, I understand putting that sort of pressure on themselves is healthy for a competitive mentality, but at the same time, you know, they got to give themselves a break at some point or another and realize that, you know, there's still a whole year of Counter-Strike to be played. You know, there's still a couple of years of Counter-Strike to be played. You know, that you're going to have your downs and you're going to have your ups. It's where you end up that matters at the end of the day, and everything else is shit that happened. So for them not to perform as well as they could have was just happened to be the tournaments. You know, how the way the tournament unfolded.
After that major, when I heard the news that Stanislaus leaving, I think it's one of the most shocking moves I've seen in CSGO, because even the context of the major, okay, yeah, it's a bad placing, but, you know, there's very close games in there against some of the teams that actually, you know, made the final of the major. This is not like they just got completely destroyed and, you know, it was obvious that the team was broken. So when I see a move like that, I have to speculate. It has to be behind the scenes. It has to be like some personality conflict. Yeah. Like this, like in game, surely this team had more legs to run. You know, they should. I always say, like, you never make a roster move until you know the team can't win anymore. You know, you've got to give it a couple more chances to go wrong, as it will, or fix itself. So what could happen that would make someone just leave a team that's got all this potential?
Yeah, I think it was an organizational thing. I think Stan didn't like the way that I managed the team. I was too hands off in a sense. You know, it's my fault. You know, in some cases that I forced myself to be more than just a team owner and pry so much into their personal lives. And when I say that, I mean that I wanted them to do things for themselves so they can, you know, eventually, you know, move on, you know, leave the nest and know how to act a certain way. And like, you know, when I moved out of my mom's house, I already knew that I needed to wash my own clothes. I already knew that I needed to pick up after myself, and you know, because nobody else was going to do it. And I think that, you know, that's one of the beauties of having a team house, is that you take in these young kids and you teach them that, right? You teach them and you force them and you fine them for not picking up their trash after themselves. But these are all preparations for them to be human beings on their own in the future. You know, because if you just send them out there, I mean, you've seen you know, rooms of people that live by themselves with just Coke bottles on their desks that are like mountains. The every single negative space of a desk is filled with trash. And although that's none of my business, it should never be none of my business what somebody does in their own apartment, but I still wanted to, you know, help them know or help them learn that, you know, at some point or another, you're going to be an adult by yourself, and use this as a training process for you to be out there and do that. And that's super wrong for me to do, you know, and as much as I see that, I still won't ever stop trying to help somebody to clean up after themselves. And I'm talking about this specific thing as an overall umbrella of what the other things may have been. So it was surprising when he came and said, you know, that he was considering leaving, and immediately I hopped on the phone and I'm like, come on, man, you can't do that. We've butted heads before, but not in the terms of we've gotten into fights, just like small disagreements on certain things, and it wasn't like that big of a deal. But again, you know, and I said this because there was a lot of he caught a lot of backlash for this when he left. And that was just the fans feeling betrayed that he left. But, you know, for the most part, when Stanislav was in OpTic, he was a stand-up dude. You know, I told him, I'm like, look, man, for everything that you've done in OpTic, not once have I ever considered you to be a bad guy. You know, in fact, you know, there has been, you know, times where I was just like, I'm like, man, this dude is here for the team and here to win. So it was disappointing because I knew that we had a good team. You know, I knew that he had a good team, and had I been given more time to show him, I think that I would have eventually made him, you know, proud in a sense, and realized that, you know, OpTic was the right place for him to be, and I was the right guy to, you know, for him to play for. But you know what, it happens, and you know, what can you do? You move on.
Right, this might sound like a really contentious topic because I realize, unlike traditional American sports, there's not a set calendar in CS. And for example, contracts don't align with the calendar of events we have anyway. You know, in theory, contracts can end any time, depending on when they were signed. But do you think that in general, players should play out their contract? Like, the problem is, when in big sports, yeah, you can, if you're like a really big superstar, maybe you can force a trade by just literally saying, like, you know, I'm not going to be able to play well, essentially. Yeah. But in general, even if things go badly in like an NBA season, you at least play out the year because, you know, the team, they've got it in mind that you're going to be whatever, the star player, the point guard, wherever you might be. And the problem, obviously, that happened with OpTic when Stanislaw leaves like this is that you can't just, you know, in-game leaders don't grow on trees. You can't just go out overnight and just go, oh, no problem, I've got your replacement, this is fine. Yeah. I mean, it's a real tough situation for you. I mean, even if he stays 2 more months, you've got some time at least to scout someone. So, I mean, is that a concern for like where esports is in CSGO in that sense?
Yeah, I think it's a concern in all esports. You know, the way that contracts are worked in a cyclical year it makes it hard to work with, right? Like all my other teams are on 2 to 3 year contracts, and that is because I'm making a long-term commitment that I will make them, you know, be in a position to where they can be nothing but champions. And obviously, again, you know, the side bonus of being an OpTic is that you get to become your own personality. I'll teach you how to, you know, the whole line that I won't go into again. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of a concern. You know, even from a sponsorship standpoint, you have to have, you know, some sort of commitment, you know, and proof of commitment that you're going to be, you know, along for the ride. You're going to have certain players along for the ride for that long. You know, when we landed the Pepsi deal with Briss Mate, you know, one of the things was the fact that, you know, I made a promise that I wasn't going to go anywhere, right? That I wasn't going to step down or do anything, and that some of the players, the house, and the current content format that we had was going to be something that was going to be there for the long run, and it was a commitment that we were making. And that's the sort of like importance to the entire, you know, sector or ecosystem, as they call it, of esports that some people just don't take into account. You know, players need to understand that, you know, they're able to get the sort of salaries that they're getting because, you know, the sponsors are making a certain commitment for you. So for you to, you know, there's nothing easier for you to do than to, you know, solidify your future or guarantee that you're going to get paid X amount for the future than to stay on the team that you started with for the period that you committed to. You know, if it's not working, it's not working. But to just quit just for quit's sake and take the easy way out to go somewhere else, and this is not something to stand in. Obviously, we had a good team. It's and I'm just talking in general terms. I think that's important. You know, work it out. You never know. You never know at one point you're going to turn the corner and the team that you're on is going to be the team that you've always wanted it to be. So playing it out and exhausting all your options before you take the I'm going to leave route is always the best case scenario.
The 2 tournaments that the team played after Stanislaw left, the 2 LANs, I have to say that these results are just depressing to me because even though I'm someone who touts quite highly, you know, the impact that tactics and a good in-game leader can have, but if you still have the 4 players who made all those results, you should be able to do something more than this, right?
Yes, 1,000%, 1,000%. And again, it comes down to you know, to a player's mentality, to, you know, the competitive mentality and the confidence that you have within yourself, that you're going to say, like, yeah, we lost a very, very, you know, critical part of our team, but we still have, you know, 4 out of the 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, we still have 4 out of the 5. Nothing has changed besides the fact that somebody's like at some point or another, and again, I don't know better than the players, and I may be speaking out of turn, and I may not know shit, and I can get criticized for this, but at some point or another, you got to be like, all right, what have we done in situations like these before? What has Stan called out in the past in situations like these that we need to adjust? You know, Stan wouldn't be the in-game leader that he is today if he didn't have the right tools to command in the time when he was, you know, having the success that he did. You know, he needed the rushes, he needed the mix wells, he needed the naps to go off the way that they did, and they needed the confidence of a Tarek to just push through certain situations. You know, so for those results, again, yeah, they were a little bit disappointing, but not in the sense of like, oh shit, we had a shitty place. It was disappointing because I knew that the mentality, the positivity, and you know, that little bit that that you need inside of you to just get out of the dumps was just not there, right? And conversation after conversation of like, oh, it's not a big deal. We're gonna get back to where we are if only you give it time. And it's tough, man. You know, it's tough when you're given the taste of success and then it's taken away as quickly as it was, because you have this thing that's like, holy shit, I have to start over. And you have to, you know, empathize with that, because if somebody was to tell me, it's like, all right, Hector, you got to start all over. Would I start all over? Something that took 7 years to build? Like, would I? I would. The answer is yes, I would, because I'm not one that quits. But it's tough, right? You have to get over that idea that, holy shit, I got to do this shit all over again. Like, what did I go through last year in order to do this? And now that I've seen the success, like, I got to do that all over. And the only thing I always tell them is like, man, you guys are so young, right? Like when you're in your 20s, you as big as every situation seems, and this goes to any 20-year-old that's out there, like you can literally fuck up your life until you're 27 and still come out alive. You know, I've done it. You know, I worked in corporate America, busted. You know, literally busted. You know, and went down to a place that I don't even want to revisit in memory, but. You know, at 29, I was able to build my own company, but I was knocked down as a 20-year-old at some point, and I never thought, she's like, all right, fuck it, man, my life's over, this is done. I'm gonna give up. You know, never. I don't have that mentality. So it's something that they need to get over within themselves in order to get to the place that they need to be.
So you referenced already that we actually had this interview planned for a while back, but because of the situation that was happening at the time, we didn't do it. So, okay, that was actually after this run of poor results. And what happened was, people will remember there was this rumor that Mixwell and Rush are going to go and join Liquid. So they're actually going to follow Stanislaw and they're going to go there. Now, I remember you did say publicly, it's not going to happen, guys, to the fans, like, don't worry. And obviously they have stayed. But this is one of those things where I'll contrast it like this, okay? From my insider info, the difference between the Stanislaw deal is, okay, technically he hadn't fully left, because obviously you have to agree to these things, etc. But in his heart, it's like he had kind of made the decision, you know, by himself, and it's like he just decided, right, I'm going to Team Liquid. It sounds more like this one was like there was more wiggle room there, right? You could sort of, you got them back, right? Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know where we were. You know, I didn't know where we were in terms of whether or not we were going to have the same team, or whether or not we were going to have to start rebuilding, and whether or not, you know, they were going to follow or what. But I wasn't going to make any statements. I wasn't going to just give up. You know, I wanted to. If I was going to fail, I was going to fail exhausting all of my options. If I was going to succeed, I was going to succeed because I exhausted all of my options. And for me to address the fans, and for me to address the community was something that I was not prepared to do, simply because I didn't have anything to do. I didn't want to get out there and be like, you know what, you know, things didn't work out, because that would be me putting it in my head that that it didn't work out without having exhausted all of my options. I wanted to have if it was going to take 2 weeks to make that decision and people wanted answers on week 1, it was not going to happen. I would never do that. I'm going to exhaust absolutely every single second that I have to make something happen before I say, okay, it didn't happen. Because I'm not going to be able to live with myself if I say, well, you know what, if I would have done this, it would have fucking worked out. Or if I would have done that, I can't live in that reality, right? Like this is my life, my passion. This is what I do, and for me to just do it at the service by not trying my hardest or doing everything that I can, it's just not something that I was willing to do. But you know, it got scary. It got scary there for a second. But you know, luckily, Rush and Mixwell really have, you know, the right mentality, and they know that it was going to be. You know, I remember, you know, sitting with Rush and Mixwell, and Rush looking at me and saying, he's like, dude, it's going to be rough for a couple of months. We're not going to be giving you the results, and immediately I'm like, bro, I've never, not once, asked you to give me results ever. I want you to be on my team. You know, I like you as a person. I want both of you on my team. You know, and you know, luckily, you know, everything panned out the way that it did, and we're here rebuilding. The fun part.
So even though I said, like, you know, at different points in times, maybe there was the occasional up and down part, obviously over 2016, if you do like the long-term view of it and the results, the line's going up. Even if it's gradual, you know, it's going up, and obviously at the end it gets pretty much to the top, even though, you know, it was obviously a surprise win for a lot of people. Has it been tough mentally to realize that you've kind of been reset? Like obviously you were hoping after the major failure, even with Stanislaw leaving, like, okay, maybe we can at least still be pretty good, and then we just find the right play, you know. But it feels like with the results recently and then people potentially leaving, it feels like everything's been reset a bit. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, you know, peaks and valleys, man. I always tell the fans that, you know, you can't just be here for our successes. You can't just be here to celebrate with us if you're not going to be sad but okay, and sad and still supportive when we're losing. You know, you don't get to just celebrate when we're in our highs. If you want to celebrate when we're in our highs, you got to be with us in our lows. And yeah, you know, being reset to where we're at right now is that peak. You know, I'm sorry, is that valley where we're in the dumps right now. But these sort of times are the ones that are gonna build how good it feels when we get to where we need to get to. How long that's gonna take, who knows? But we're gonna get there. I have no doubt in my mind that we are going to be where we need to be in Counter-Strike.
So you alluded before that you were one of the teams that was in the hunt to get Astralis. Well, obviously they weren't Astralis at the time, but the team that became Astralis, obviously now a fantastic team. Yeah. Obviously, you've got an NA team at the moment. Do you think at some point in the future, like, are you now all in on the idea that it has to be an NA team for OpTic? Do you think one day you could have just one of the top European teams instead would represent OpTic? Like, are you one of those people who has a set idea in terms of what has to represent OpTic?
No. You know, OpTic's a global brand. You know, we have fans everywhere. For me, it's about the players, the personalities, and how I can help them be a part of a better story, if that makes any sense. So no, you know, I'll never say never to anything. You know, I've been in the industry long enough to to know that at some point or another something new is going to come, and for you to make a harsh statement like I'll never do this or I'll always be this is just, you know, ignorant. Even with the win at E-League, obviously OpTic is still largely associated with Call of Duty. If people think of OpTic and like where they're biggest, they'll still say Call of Duty. Now whether or not the games, like whatever size each game is irrelevant. But since part of this, like you said, has been transcending Call of Duty at certain points in time by building the brands and getting the YouTube and all the social media metrics up, do you see a world where OpTic CS:GO could be the bigger brand than OpTic Call of Duty? Yeah, I mean, it's a competition within ourselves, right? Like there was always a Nadeshot versus Scumpy, like who's going to get bigger the quickest, right? You know, Nadeshot was really smart in diversifying his portfolio in a sense, but you know, on Scumpy's behalf, he's like the best Call of Duty player ever, and the fact that he's able to be as good as he is on camera, like that has elevated him to places where, you know, he's the biggest. And in OpTic, the sense of competition within itself is the same thing. You know, I want to build Halo to be as big as Call of Duty. I want, you know, Gears of War to be, you know, big, and I obviously would like to see, you know, my Counter-Strike players just be massive personalities where we win, whether we win a tournament or not. You know, you know, winning and getting championships, that's where the glory is. But winning in life is where you can do something that you love doing, and you know, nothing or nobody can take that away from you except for yourself when you stop doing it or when you don't nurture your ability. So yeah, you know, that's my goal. I do want to build these large personalities within each category of the esports that I'm involved in, just because if they succeed, I succeed. You know, if we elevate each other to as we grow. So and you can call bullshit in some scenarios. If you don't know me, you can call bullshit. But if you know me, you know that I mean this more than anything.
So one of the things that started to bleed over into CSGO and had already happened in some of the other esports games is that some of the organizations have taken on massive investment from outside. I mean, famously, obviously, sports teams, etc. People have a lot of money to spend. And so in the short term, the advantage that gives some of those orgs is that they can, if they really want to, almost regardless of what the market value is, they can just get the players they want if they really want to. If they're willing to spend that money, they can.
Yeah.
So it feels like for some people in esports, that puts pressure on them to do the same. It's like if you want to stay in the game, if you want to have the biggest player, for example, then the way to catch up to those guys is you take on the millions in investment. Is there pressure on OpTic to go down this route?
No. I mean, look, I don't know. I haven't felt those pressures. You know, you can... It's really easy to when you have money. It's really easy to get what you want. You know, the one thing that you can never and will never be able to buy is fandom, and you'll never be able to buy the fandom, and you'll never be able to buy support. You know, you're never going to be able to say it's like, hey, I'm gonna pay you to just follow OpTic because you're getting paid to, right? It is the storyline that we built from the beginning that has allowed everybody that is a supporter of OpTic to be that. But no, you know, I think it's good in some situations. I think some organizations definitely need a different set of structure, you know, to help them grow. Look, I'm not saying that I will never, you know, take investments. I'm not saying that I will. You know, I'm gonna continue to do my job, and if an opportunity presents itself to explore it, then I'm gonna explore it. If it makes sense, it makes sense. You know, we have, you know, done that dance. We have explored that possibility because people have been interested, but it just hasn't made sense in terms of what I'm looking to do in the space for the next 10 years. You know, which is I'm here long term. I'm here. I want to be that old bald. Well, actually, I'm never bald because I have amazing genetics and my hair is great. But I want to have a full set of like gray hair, like being hoisted up to the bleachers or the private box and seeing my team, you know, play. I'm here lifetime. I'm not here to just, you know, get my, you know, some chips off the table and go, you know, fuck off somewhere. You know, I'm not. This is what I like doing. I know what it's like to work for somebody else. And this isn't it, you know, and this for me is not work. It's my passion side. I'm gonna do this until the wheels fall off.
Okay, so at the end of the interview, do you have a final message or someone you want to thank or shout out?
Yeah, you know what? Well, first, thank you for having me on. I've been a big fan since, you know, 2 years ago when you helped me make the decision, whether you knew it or not, on how I wanted to step into Counter-Strike. But most importantly, I want to thank my Counter-Strike team to, you know, for entrusting in me the fact that if you give me time, I will do right by you and do well for you.
Welcome everybody. Blessed are those that visit this channel and enjoy the content here.